Ladies and gentlemen, you know, the day you become truly unstoppable isn't when you finally win. It's when you lose the desire to prove anything to anyone. We spend the better part of our lives chasing a ghost, a version of success that looks beautiful in a frame, but feels hollow, right? Hollow in our very hands. From a young age, we are conditioned to believe that achievement is a currency we spend to buy the respect and validation of the world around us. I mean, we treat our milestones like trophies meant for others to admire, rather than milestones for our own souls to cherish. Think about your most recent accomplishment. I want you to be honest with yourself. Was the joy found in the quiet satisfaction of the work? Or was it actually in the anticipation of how others would react when they found out? In the world of psychology, this is the trap of performative living. It is the subtle, often subconscious act of treating your life like a stage play, where the world is your audience, and every choice you make is just a line delivered for applause. But there is a profound difference between performing a life and actually living one. When you perform, you see, you are constantly looking outward, measuring your pace against a crowd that isn't even running your race. You become a spectator of your own existence, checking the reviews of your choices before you've even had the chance to experience them. This creates a fragile identity. If your sense of worth is built on the shifting sands of social expectation, then your peace of mind will always be at the mercy of someone else's opinion. You aren't truly free. You are simply a high-achieving prisoner to the social script. The question we must ask ourselves is simple, but devastating. How much of your current path was actually chosen by you? How many of your desires are truly yours? And how many are just, echoes of what you were told you should want? To break these chains, we have to look closer at the architecture of our choices. We need to look at who is actually holding the pen as you write your story. Later in this video, I will introduce you to the sovereignty audit, a psychological framework designed to help you reclaim your agency. It is the key, the real key, to determining whether you are the architect of your own destiny or merely a tenant in a life designed by someone else. But before we can conduct that audit, we must first understand the heavy price we pay for following the illusion of achievement. Gentle and reflective. Ladies and gentlemen, consider the invisible audience that follows you from the moment you wake up until the very moment you close your eyes at night. We often speak of exhaustion as something physical, a lack of sleep or a demanding schedule. But there is a far more insidious form of fatigue that many of us carry without ever realizing it. It is the psychological weight of the spectator. Thoughtful. Psychology identifies this as the performance self. It is that hyper-vigilant version of you that is constantly scanning the room, measuring the tone of your voice, and curating your reactions to ensure they align with what others expect. Whether you are at a boardroom table or simply posting a photo of your morning coffee, a part of your brain is dedicated to a high-stakes performance. You see, you are not just living your life, you are managing the perception of your life. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why you feel so drained. Constant external monitoring is a biological tax on your nervous system. When we live for the good jobs, the nods of approval, and the digital dopamine of a like, we are effectively keeping our brains in a state of low-level threat detection. We are asking ourselves, am I enough? Am I doing this right? Do they see me the way I want to be seen? This mental surveillance requires immense cognitive energy. I mean, it is like running a complex background program on a laptop that slowly drains the battery until the entire system begins to lag. We have been conditioned to believe that this performance is necessary for survival, that our value is a fluctuating currency traded in the marketplace of public opinion. But as we play these roles, we experience what psychologists call a leakage of self. We spend so much energy polishing the mask that the person behind it begins to wither. We become experts at being what they need while becoming strangers to what we actually require. But I want you to pause for a moment and consider a radical possibility. Think about the sheer volume of mental bandwidth you currently devote to the opinions, judgments, and expectations of people who, in reality, are far too preoccupied with their own performances to truly notice yours. What would happen to your internal landscape if the spectator suddenly vanished, right? Imagine the surge of energy that would return to you if you no longer had to carry the weight of everyone else's opinion. Think of the clarity you would gain if your choices were no longer filtered through the lens of how will this look, and were instead driven by what does this build? The bleed of your personal power stops the moment you realize that the audience you are performing for is largely a projection of your own insecurities. Firmly, however, knowing this is only the first step. To truly stop the drain, we must address the radical shift in perspective required to turn the lights off on the stage and start living in the light of your own truth. Profound. We must look at what happens when you decide to become the only observer that matters. Because once you stop seeking permission to exist, you unlock a version of yourself that is truly terrifying to the status quo. So, how do we begin the process of cutting the strings? How do we transition from being a performer to becoming a practitioner of our own power? This brings us to a fundamental shift in how we perceive our own worth. Ladies and gentlemen, we often mistake strength for a form of hardened resistance. We imagine that to be unstoppable, we must build thicker walls, sharpen our edges, and learn how to endure the blows of life with a stoic, unyielding silence. But you see, true psychological liberation doesn't come from getting tougher. It comes from a collapse, a total, systematic dissolution of your dependency on the external world to tell you who you are. I mean, think of your self-worth as a currency, right? For most of us, this currency is highly volatile, traded daily on a market we do not control. If someone compliments us, the value goes up. If we are criticized, ignored, or misunderstood, the value crashes. We spend our lives frantically trying to manipulate the market, performing for the social mirror just to keep our heads above water. But here is the profound truth. You only become unstoppable when you realize that your worth is not a currency at all. It is a non-negotiable fact of your existence, as certain as the gravity that holds you to the earth. When you stop looking for your reflection in the eyes of others, the mirror loses its power over you. This is the great collapse of dependency. It is the moment you realize that the approval you've been chasing was never the prize. It was the cage. When you no longer need the world to validate your right to occupy space, you cease to be a performer, and you become a practitioner of your own reality. In psychology, we often talk about the locus of control. When your worth is external, you are a leaf in the wind, subject to every shift in social temperature, right? But when you collapse those dependencies, your center of gravity shifts inward. Strength, in this new light,
is not defined by how much you can resist, but by how much you can remain independent of the noise. You are no longer fighting against the world. You are simply no longer tethered to its whims. This shift changes the very nature of your momentum. You aren't moving faster because you're pushing harder. You're moving faster because you've stopped carrying the heavy weight of other people's expectations. You are no longer navigating a maze designed by social norms. You are walking a straight line towards your own truth. But, this independence comes with a price that many are afraid to pay. It requires us to face a void that we've spent our entire lives trying to fill with the noise of others. When the strings are finally cut and the social mirror is shattered, we are left with a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Because if we are no longer defined by what they think of us, we have to face the raw, unvarnished reality of who we are when no one is watching. And as it turns out, that inner landscape is where the real transformation begins. Ladies and gentlemen, once we stand in that quiet, unvarnished space of the self, we begin to actually realize, how much of our internal territory we have surrendered to the expectations of others. To reclaim this ground is not an act of rebellion, but an act of internal sovereignty. It is the process of deciding that your soul is no longer a public park for others to walk through, but a private sanctuary where you hold the only key. This transition requires more than just a shift in mindset. It requires specific psychological rituals to anchor your new reality.
The first step in this reclamation is what we call a sovereignty audit. I want you to look closely, at the architecture of your daily life and identify 3 commitments you are currently keeping for no other reason than to avoid the discomfort of judgment. Perhaps it is a social obligation that drains you, a professional standard that doesn't align with your values, or a persona you maintain just to keep the peace. Firmly, ladies and gentlemen, your energy is a finite resource. Measured. To become unstoppable, you must gracefully release one of these burdens today. Softly, permit yourself to say no without a lengthy explanation. Whispering. In that silence, you will find the first bricks of your new foundation. Calmly. Next, we must embrace the power of the silent work. With irony, in our modern world, we are conditioned to announce our intentions before we have even begun the labor, right? Thoughtfully, we post the workout, we share the business plan, we broadcast the dream, and in doing so, we receive a premature hit of dopamine from the digital applause. Gravely, this social validation tricks the brain into feeling a sense of completion without the actual effort. Firmly, to practice internal sovereignty, you must begin a project, a habit, or a transformation in total secrecy. Allow the action to be its own reward. Softly. When you build in the dark, the foundation is made of grit rather than the fragile approval of the crowd. Reflectively. Finally, you must adopt the stance of neutral observation. Throughout your day, you will be pelted with the opinions of others. Some will offer glowing praise, others will offer sharp criticism. With wisdom, to the person seeking sovereignty, both must be treated with the same detached curiosity. View these opinions as mere data points, much like the weather. If someone says it is raining, you do not let it define your character. You simply decide whether or not to carry an umbrella. When you stop letting praise inflate your ego and stop letting criticism bruise your spirit, you become truly dangerous to the status quo. Steady. You are no longer a puppet reacting to the pull of social strings. Calmly. These rituals are the tools of the self-governed. They are the ways we tell our subconscious mind that the era of external control has ended.
a bit mysterious. But you see, as we begin to master this internal world, a new challenge emerges. Because once you are no longer distracted by the opinions of others, you start to notice something else. Whispering. You start to notice the subtle, hidden ways your own mind has been working against you all along. Philosophical. And as it turns out, the final gatekeeper to your freedom isn't someone else. It's a part of you that you haven't even met yet. Warmly, with gravitas. Ladies and gentlemen, when we reach this final threshold, you see, we encounter the emergence of the unstoppable self. Softly, almost whispering. It is not a version of you that is aggressive, loud, or demanding. Thoughtfully. In fact, it is the quietest version of you that has ever existed. This is the moment of total sovereignty, a state where your internal compass is so finely tuned that the storms of the world can no longer knock you off course.
For most of our lives, right, we are taught that being unstoppable means winning, running faster, climbing higher, or outperforming the competition. But true psychological sovereignty is the realization that victory is no longer about winning against others. It is about the profound peace of no longer needing to. You become unstoppable the day you realize, truly realize, that your worth is no longer a subject open for public debate. It is a settled matter. Think about the sheer volume of energy you have spent defending your choices, seeking permission, or trying to cure the discomfort of being misunderstood. When that energy is no longer leaked into the world for the sake of validation, well, it returns to you. It crystallizes. It becomes the foundation of a life lived on your own terms. You no longer need to win the argument because you have already won the battle for your own soul. As we conclude this journey, I want to invite you to perform what we call a sovereignty audit. Look at your current life, your career, your social circles, and even your private goals, and ask yourself, which of these things am I doing purely to satisfy a ghost from my past or a critic in my present? Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to share one discovery from your sovereignty audit in the comments below. What is one area of your life where you are finally reclaiming your power? If these deep dives into the human psyche resonate with you, I invite you to subscribe to Mindscapes Explored and join our community of thinkers. Together, we will continue to map the hidden territories of the mind. We whisper you today with one final lingering thought to carry with you. Now that you are no longer a prisoner of expectation, and the gates of your own mind are finally open, what will you do with your newfound freedom?